They drove iron spikes through the corpses. They bound their mouths with stone. The fear wasn't of dying. It was of coming back. Long before the words zombie apocalypse ever echoed through pop culture, ancient peoples were already terrified of the dead returning. But their fear had little to do with brain-eating ghouls or viral outbreaks. It was something older, something deeper. From Mesopotamia to Egypt to the Mediterranean world, the belief that the dead could rise wasn't just myth. It was a reality that shaped how entire societies buried, punished, and remembered their dead. Tonight, we will follow the trail of these ancient anxieties. From broken bones in shallow graves to sacred rituals designed to contain the soul, we'll uncover what early civilizations truly feared, and whether those fears were ever truly buried. Let us begin. The first undead, when the dead wouldn't stay buried. In ancient Mesopotamia, some of the world's oldest writings describe restless spirits, beings called etimu, who wandered the earth after improper burial. They were not monsters in form, but they tormented the living through sickness, madness, and despair. According to historian Irving Finkel, these spirits were believed to rise when forgotten, neglected, or unjustly treated. The undead were not evil. They were angry, and they wanted to be heard. The Greeks, too, feared what they called revenants. Archaeological evidence suggests that graves dating as far back as 500 BCE contained skeletons weighed down with rocks, their limbs shattered, their mouths sealed shut. Historian Daniel Ogden, writing extensively on this subject, claims that such burials were intended to bind the corpse, to prevent it from rising in body or spirit. Some were suspected witches, others murder victims, but all were believed to harbor unfinished vengeance. Why such elaborate precautions? Why would early societies invest time, ritual, and resources to keep the dead down? One answer may lie in the nature of trauma and guilt. As noted by anthropologist Paul Barber, societies that experienced high mortality through war, plague, or injustice often generated beliefs about the dead returning. These were not random superstitions. They were systems of grief and perhaps confession. Yet what's most chilling is how these beliefs were never entirely abandoned. They evolved, hidden in folklore, transformed by empire, and later reanimated by cinema. But we're not there yet. Before the zombie became a plague or a pop culture icon, it served a different purpose. It was not to scare us with death, but with what we left unresolved. So what changed? Who took this spiritual warning and turned it into a monster? And what does that tell us about the stories we bury? We'll answer that when we return to the island where the dead walked, not to haunt, but to serve. Stolen after death, the slave origins of the zombie myth. The worst fate in Haitian Vodou was not to die, it was to be brought back. In the hills of Saint-Domingue, the enslaved whispered of a punishment more terrifying than chains or lashes. A body risen from the grave, robbed of its soul, forced to labor without will. Not a ghost, not a spirit. A person turned into property again. This was the zombie, and to those who lived under French colonial rule, it wasn't a myth. It was a memory. What we now call a zombie didn't begin in horror films. It began in horror systems. As documented in the work of historian Elizabeth McAllister, the zombie emerged as a potent symbol during Haiti's colonial era, an era defined by brutal sugar plantations, Catholic suppression of African religions, and constant rebellion. Enslaved Africans brought with them spiritual traditions rooted in West and Central Africa, which over time merged into what we now call Vodou. In this belief system, death was not final. The soul could be stolen by a bokor, a sorcerer who could trap it in a jar or force the body to rise again, to work, to obey, to forget itself. If this glimpse into Haitian Vodou sparked something in you, you're not alone. We've explored its deeper mysteries in a full video. From sacred rites to forbidden spells, it's waiting for you in the comments. The psychological weight of this belief cannot be overstated. Scholars analyzing this period highlight how the zombie myth reflected a deeper, lived trauma. The fear that even in death, one's freedom was not guaranteed. That the chains could follow you into the grave. According to anthropologist Wade Davis, whose controversial research in The Serpent and the Rainbow brought global attention to the zombie rituals of Haiti, there are documented cases of individuals pronounced dead, only to reappear years later, dazed, voiceless, altered. Davis theorized the use of tetrodotoxin, a neurotoxin found in pufferfish, as a possible biological mechanism to induce a death-like state. Critics have debated his conclusions, but the question remains: can cultural belief, trauma, and chemistry combine to create something that feels real enough to terrify an entire society? Could this be the first scientifically explainable form of a real zombie virus? The modern mind may dismiss it, but there's something unsettling in how the zombie was never a threat to others. It did not bite. It did not chase. It did not spread infection. It simply obeyed. It worked the fields. It mirrored the perfect slave. And that, perhaps, is why it remains so terrifying. If you've ever thought the zombie apocalypse was just about monsters, you might need to look again, because the true origin of the undead myth is not a fear of extinction. It's a fear of never being free. But what happens when this intimate horror is stripped of its meaning and transformed into spectacle? Next, we'll follow the moment when the zombie mythology around the world was hijacked, rebranded not to warn, but to entertain. And we'll meet the filmmaker who turned ancient fear into mass-market terror. If stories like this make you see history differently, if they remind you that fear, faith, and science often share the same pulse, then stay with us. Like this video, subscribe to our channel for more hidden histories, and share it with someone who still believes the undead belong only to fiction. It matters more than you think. Now let's continue. When science met fear, can zombies be real? It wasn't a myth that brought Clairvius Narcisse back from the dead. It was science. In 1962, Narcisse collapsed outside a hospital in rural Haiti. He was declared dead, buried by his family, and mourned. 18 years later, he returned, confused, silent, and claiming he had been enslaved as a zombie. His case shocked the world. But what disturbed researchers more was the possibility that his story might be true. As the world raced toward modernity, belief in the undead should have faded. But instead, the science behind zombies began to blur the lines between folklore and biology. Could the fear of the walking dead be grounded in something observable, something measurable? According to research by ethnobotanist Wade Davis, Clairvius Narcissus' apparent resurrection was not supernatural, but pharmacological. Davis proposed that a cocktail of natural toxins, including tetrodotoxin from pufferfish and dissociative compounds from datura plants, could simulate death, induce paralysis, and erase memory. The body might live, the self might not. While many scientists have challenged his methodology, the core question persists. Could a person be turned into a zombie without dying at all? And this question opens a darker door, because cases like Narcissus are not isolated. Around the world, there are real-life zombie cases, stories of people declared dead, later found alive, suffering from amnesia, catatonia, or psychosis. Some were victims of trauma, others victims of belief. Scholars like Roland Littlewood have analyzed reports of so-called zombies within psychiatric frameworks. One pattern emerges again and again. Belief in zombification often follows deep emotional fractures: grief, abandonment, community, rejection. In some cases, the diagnosis points to neurological causes of zombie behavior, Cotard's delusion, where patients believe they are dead; akinetic mutism, where the body functions but the mind withdraws. These are not tales of monsters. They are portraits of broken minds. And yet, the world continues to ask, can zombies happen in real life? Parasites like Toxoplasma gondii control the brains of rats. Fungi like Ophiocordyceps hijack ants, forcing them to climb to their deaths. Modern zombie myths are no longer confined to the supernatural. They live at the intersection of neuroscience, virology, and fear. What would happen if a virus learned to shut off empathy? Or if a prion disease altered human consciousness, not to kill, but to suppress? But what happens when fear goes viral? In the next chapter, we step into the world that made zombies global, not through science or faith, but cinema, where one film turned myth into monster, and the undead became unstoppable. Flesh eaters and fallout. How zombies took over the apocalypse. It wasn't the virus that changed everything. It was the broadcast. On the 1st of October 1968, a black and white film flickered onto American screens. Night of the Living Dead was crude, graphic, and relentlessly bleak. But it didn't just shock audiences. It reprogrammed them. In a single night, the zombie stopped being a servant of sorcery and became the face of apocalypse. Before George A. Romero, zombies in history were passive figures, enslaved, mourned, pitied. But in Romero's world, they were infectious, violent, and endless. They didn't just walk, they consumed. And what they devoured wasn't just flesh, it was the illusion of safety. Romero never called them zombies. But as Night of the Living Dead spread, audiences did. And what they saw wasn't a monster, it was a mirror. According to cultural historian Kyle Bishop, the 1960s marked a rupture in the American psyche. War abroad, riots at home, assassinations, shattered trust in authority. Romero's zombies emerged not from folklore, but from failure. The failure of systems to protect. The failure of heroes to survive. The failure of meaning itself. And so began the zombie apocalypse, meaning we know today. Society collapsing under the weight of its own denial. The undead were no longer magical. They were clinical, viral, a disease that spread not only through bites, but through television screens, radio silence, missed phone calls. The infection was panic. Zombie symbolism in movies evolved quickly. In Dawn of the Dead, 1978, the undead wandered shopping malls, consumers stripped of identity. In 28 Days Later, 2002, they ran with rage, not hunger. In The Walking Dead, survival was no longer victory. It was purgatory. Scholars analyzing this evolution highlight how each generation rewrote the zombie myth to reflect its own dread. The Cold War gave us nuclear fallout zombies. Post 9/11 gave us biological warfare and terrorism. The 2008 crisis gave us the gig economy of survival. And in all of it, one theme remained: the terror of losing agency. The zombie apocalypse's real possibility was no longer a question of folklore. It was a simulation, rehearsed again and again in culture, and the audience kept coming back, not to be scared, but to prepare. As noted by media theorist Henry Jenkins, the zombie became the perfect vessel for collective anxiety. It was empty, yet familiar, mindless, yet moral. You weren't just watching the end, you were wondering who you would become in it. Have you heard a version of this story before? Share it below. Because the next outbreak wouldn't begin in a graveyard. It would begin with a whisper, a meme, a headline too strange to ignore. And in our final chapter, we'll ask a question that terrifies more than any scream. What if we want the end to come? What if we've already built a faith around it? The new religion of the undead. They don't shuffle anymore, they trend. The zombie apocalypse isn't just a story we fear. It's one we rehearse again and again. In TikToks, Reddit threads, YouTube simulations, bunker walkthroughs and survival guides. What began as a spiritual warning and became a cinematic monster has now turned into something stranger, a belief system, a ritual of collapse, a prophecy we seem eager to fulfill. We used to ask, can zombies happen in real life? Now we ask, what's your zombie apocalypse survival plan? Preppers stack rations, influencers post outbreak drills. Even the CDC, the real one, once published a guide called Preparedness 101, Zombie Apocalypse. According to cultural analyst Sarah Lauro, the modern zombie myth is no longer about the undead. It's about the living and what we've stopped believing in. As traditional systems of meaning crumble, religion, government, community, the zombie rises as a blank vessel, a collapse simulator, a cleansing fire. That's why the zombie virus 2025 trend exploded online. It wasn't just satire, it was ritual. The joke hid a longing for disruption, for clarity, for renewal. And in this new mythology, survival isn't just about food and shelter, it's about morality, who you save, who you trust, who you become. Psychologists like Dr. John Vervaeke argue that such myths act as spiritual rehearsals for transformation, modern versions of death and rebirth. In the stories of the undead, we see ourselves tested, purified, reborn. But what if this ritual obsession, this fascination with collapse, isn't new at all? Because before the zombie became our symbol of infection and conformity, another creature carried the same torch of fear. One that didn't rot, but seduced. One that didn't consume flesh, but drained life. The vampire. Historically, the zombie mythology around the world and vampire folklore overlap more than we realize. Both rose from the same primal terror that death is not the end, that something might rise with our body, but without our soul. In Eastern Europe, villagers staked corpses through the chest, not to kill a monster, but to stop the spread of undeath. In Greece, revenants and vampires were once the same word, vrikolakas. According to historian Paul Barber, early vampire cases were likely misidentified outbreaks of disease, tuberculosis, plague, even premature burial. But socially, they performed the same function as the zombie myth. They gave shape to grief, guilt, and fear. Both were stories of contagion, and both turned neighbors into nightmares. Perhaps that's why the two myths still feed each other. One decaying, one eternal, reflections of how we process death and desire. If this fascinates you, watch next. The dark truth behind ancient vampire legends. It reveals how our obsession with the undead began long before cinema, in blood rites, burial rituals, and the quiet dread of eternal hunger. It's on screen now. Because whether it's the vampire or the zombie, we keep resurrecting the same story. And maybe the question isn't why the dead return, it's why we keep calling them back. Like this video. Subscribe to the channel. Share with a friend. Good night.